Mysteries from the Middle Ages that still have not been solved. The facts don't always speak louder than the silence at certain points in history. Some chapters make it appear as though time stands still and logic can't make sense of what's left behind. Mysteries that have withstood the test of time can be found in the remnants of long-gone monasteries, etched into the stone walls of crumbling castles, and hidden beneath the worn ink of long-lost manuscripts. Knights and kings weren't the only inhabitants of the Middle Ages. Mysteries shrouded the era, mysterious lights that suddenly emerged in the sky. In front of the telescope, mortal remains interred with spikes driven into the chest. Incredible accuracy in the construction of castles. Texts penned in tongues that have never been spoken. Hey, who put these buildings up? How did these texts become recorded? Why do a lot of these riddles disappear right as we're about to solve them? This is real life. We still don't know the answers to these mysteries of our past. Proof that the Middle Ages might have preserved wisdom we have since forgotten or realities we are not yet prepared to confront. So unwind and get ready to explore the most eerie and inexplicable riddles of the Middle Ages. Your perspective on the past might be forever altered by what you're about to learn. The enigma of the Tower's princes and the infant royal's mysterious abduction. Grey English sky frames the Tower of London, the centuries-old whispers concealed within its massive stone walls. It has withstood dynastic strife, pestilence, and conflict because it is old, cold, and unmovable. But of all the stories told there, none have resounded quite like the one about the brothers who went missing while staying there. A summer in the year 1483. The effects of the Civil War on England are still felt today. Following the passing of his father, Edward IV, Edward V becomes king at the age of 12. Richard, Duke of York, is 9 years old and his younger brother. They are all taken to the Tower of London, where they will supposedly be kept safe until the coronation of a young king. However, there is no coronation. Weeks turn into months. Less and less people are noticing the lads. When summer comes to a close, sightings come to a complete halt, and after that, nothing. Absence of any official. Death. No funeral. No cause of death. You won't see them anymore. The princes in the tower, what became of them? Their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, claims the lads are not his legitimate descendants and becomes Richard III after declaring them illegitimate. An official document, the Titulus Reis, supports his argument that Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was forcibly performed. On the other hand, the timing seems off. We can't turn a blind eye to Richard's rise to power and the lad's disappearance. People in the know murmur. Theories flourish like ivy. Whether or not Richard III. To have them killed, so he could prove his point? When that was the case, why were no corpses brought forward to put an end to speculation? Who else would it be besides Richard? The Duke of Buckingham, Henry Stafford, is the target of certain accusations. Some have proposed Henry Tudor's mother, Margaret Balfour. A greater number of questions remain unanswered. 2 little skeletons were supposedly found in a wooden box by workers tearing down a staircase in the White Tower in 1674, more than a century later. Many people start to think the re-erected bones in Westminster Abbey are the ones of the long-lost princes. However, conclusive evidence is never provided. Scientific testing in the modern era has never been legal. Historians disagree on whether the youngsters were indeed murdered. They might have been taken in secret for political reasons, hidden by loyalists, transported across sea, or smuggled out. Men across Europe posing as Richard, the younger prince, would surface decades later. There was a certain Perkin Warbeck who, with the help of other kings, went to war with Henry Zebmer before being captured and beheaded. Could he have been the wandering prince or merely a power pawn? But the tower itself, what about it? Contrary to popular belief, it was not a frigid dungeon at the time. During the 15th century, it served as both a palace and a jail for the royal family. Once known as the Garden Tower, the Bloody Tower is currently where the princes were held. The name, which is both descriptive and evocative, was given to it considerably later. Despite this, the foreboding corridors and thick walls revealed nothing. No signs of life, no signs of death, no hidden doors, just the knowledge that two royal children had formerly resided here before mysteriously disappearing. The prince's mysterious disappearance from the tower is one of the most disturbing gaps in history. Nobody seems to have any ideas, and that's not all. Lack of closure is what it is. Two lives, a throne of blood, futures ruined. Was it a stark political imperative? Was it compassion? Is it something different entirely? Underneath the stone, behind the curtain of time, why does the truth seem so near, yet elusive? An encounter with the unexplained, the Green Children of Woolpit, quite close to the old market town of Bury St. Mount Edmunds. In the picturesque English countryside of Suffolk, the sleepy hamlet of Woolpit sits amidst rolling hills and hedges. Time appears to have stood still in this tranquil rural area today, with its wheat fields and meandering footpaths. One of the most inexplicable and long-lived mysteries of the Middle Ages took place on this peaceful area of land in the 12th century. It started out suddenly, like many of the weird stories in history. Deep trenches were dug by a pack of wolves one day as the locals farmed the fields around them. A boy and a girl emerged from the woods, playing on a trap that had been used to catch predators in the past. Unfamiliar fabrics were used to make their garments. Strangest of all, their skin had a verdant hue, and their speech was incomprehensible, unlike any regional dialect. Writers Ralph of Cagashaw and William of Newburgh, both highly regarded historical chroniclers, contributed to the report. Though they differ in specifics, each author wrote from personal knowledge of the event. However, the fundamental plot is unchanged. Lost and confused, two little green-skinned kids, spotted in the fields of Woolpit by reapers, terrified. After being brought to the village, the inhabitants did their best to take care of them. The kids, though, would eat nothing but bread and sausage. Their strength gradually diminished as time went on. They were then allegedly presented with uncooked broad beans that were still attached to their pods. It was only after that that the kids started eating like rabbits. Gradually, they started to adjust. The native language was picked up by them. They were no longer verdant. Because he was younger and more fragile, the boy became sick and passed away. However, the daughter made it through, spending a good portion of her life in the care of the local landowner, Sir Richard Dan. She did, in the end, share her tale. According to her, she and her brother were from a verdant land known as St. Martin's Land. In their universe, sunlight was always a pale twilight. Beyond the vast river, she described a region that shone with light. Her family was tending their flocks when they heard what sounded like bells, she said. After hearing the sound, they proceeded to a cave. They wandered in darkness for what felt like moments, and when they emerged, they were in Woolpit. How much of this story is allegory? How much, if any, is truth? Historians and folklorists have long debated the Green Children of Woolpit. Some dismiss the account as medieval allegory, a moral tale cloaked in the strange hues of folklore. Others argue the children were real but misunderstood. The green skin, they say, might have been caused by hypochromic anemia, a condition linked to malnutrition that can give the skin a sallow greenish tint, especially in children deprived of a balanced diet. But this theory raises its own questions. If they were merely sick or starved, where did they come from? Why did they speak no known language? Why did they describe a land of twilight where the sun never rose? And what of the cave? Was it a metaphor or an actual passage between worlds? Another interpretation suggests the children may have been Flemish refugees. During the 12th century, there were Flemish settlements in England, communities that were sometimes isolated and later wiped out by conflict. Perhaps these children were orphaned during political upheaval and wandered into Woolpit, confused and traumatized. Their strange language may have been a foreign tongue, their odd clothes simply regional dress. But again, why the green skin? And why the story of a world with no sun? Then there are the more speculative theories. Some suggest the children were from a subterranean world, an ancient civilization living beneath the earth. Others go further, proposing extraterrestrial origins, that they were not of this world at all, but lost beings from somewhere far beyond. The girl's description of twilight in a glowing realm across a river has even been interpreted by some as a garbled memory of a different planet or of passing between dimensions. Of course, these explanations are speculative, impossible to prove, and easy to dismiss. But the story itself refuses to die. It lingers in academic journals and folklore collections, in children's books and local legends. The village of Woolpit, with its unassuming cottages and medieval church, still bears quiet testimony to a mystery that no one has quite explained. Even today, travelers visit the site of the old wolf pits. They look out across the same green fields where so many centuries ago, two children appeared out of nowhere without names, without explanation. Who were they? Where did they come from? Were they simply victims of famine and war, or evidence of something we have yet to understand? The Voic manuscript, the book that speaks a silent language. It sits under glass, locked in the BCA Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. Its pages are yellowed but well preserved, filled with strange looping script and other worldly illustrations. No title, no author, no known origin. It's small, barely more than 200 pages. But what it contains has baffled historians, linguists, cryptographers, and codireekers for over a century. This is the Voiec manuscript, named after Wilfrid Voiec, the Polish book dealer who acquired it in 1912. The manuscript is by all appearances a book, created in the late medieval period, carbon dated to the early 15th century. Its vellum pages were likely made sometime around the early 1400s. But what was written on those pages? And more importantly, by whom? The script is unlike anything else in recorded history. Flowing from left to right, it features looping, consistent characters repeated often enough to suggest a structured language. And yet, the language is entirely unknown. It doesn't match Latin, Greek, Hebrew, or Arabic. It doesn't resemble any ancient or modern alphabet. And despite decades of effort, no one has been able to translate a single sentence. But it's not only the text that confounds. The illustrations are even stranger. There are botanical drawings, plants with leaves and roots, but none that correspond to real species. Some appear almost plausible, while others feel like hybrid inventions from a forgotten world. There are astronomical diagrams showing suns, stars, and zodiac signs, but rendered with a surreal dreamlike geometry. Some pages are filled with naked women bathing in tubs connected by serpentine tubes, like a cross between alchemy and fantasy. And then there are these circular diagrams, mysterious wheels and starbursts, almost mechanical in design, but accompanied by no recognizable labels. It is as if someone encoded a world's worth of knowledge into symbols only they could understand. Who would create such a thing? Several theories have emerged over the centuries. Some scholars argue it was a Farmar Macapa, a guide to plants and healing written in code to protect valuable medical knowledge. Others think it may have been an attempt at inventing a new language constructed with such commitment that it mimics the statistical properties of real speech. Some believe it was the work of an isolated genius, perhaps a monk or recluse driven to create a language known only to himself. There have even been claims that the book was an elaborate hoax, crafted to seem meaningful, but ultimately gibberish. Yet, modern analysis has shown patterns in the script too complex, too self-consistent to be entirely random. And so, the mystery ends. The manuscript passed through many hands before it reached Voic. There are signs it once belonged to Emperor Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire in the late 1500s, a ruler fascinated by the occult and the sciences who may have paid a small fortune for it. One letter found with the manuscript claims it had been studied by several great minds, including Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar known for his work on hieroglyphs and mysticism, but no record of a successful translation exists. Only fragments of correspondence filled with uncertainty and wonder. In recent decades, the manuscript has been subjected to computer analysis, linguistic modeling, and even artificial intelligence. Some researchers believe it may follow an underlying grammatical structure. Others have proposed that the text encodes phonetic sounds from a lost dialect. Still, no one has cracked its code. Of course, there are more speculative theories. Some believe the Voynich manuscript came from a lost civilization, its knowledge preserved in a language now extinct. Others suggest it contains alchemical secrets, recipes for transmutation, or maps of the cosmos drawn from another worldview. There are even those who believe the manuscript could be the product of contact with something non-human. Visions, transmissions, or ideas that arrive from a place beyond conventional understanding. But without a key, we are left with silence. Words that cannot speak, drawings that point nowhere, meaning that remains out of reach. And perhaps that is what draws us back to it again and again. There is something haunting about a book that no one alive can read. Something almost sacred in the idea of a knowledge so carefully protected that it has survived fire, war, and time itself only to remain locked just beyond our grasp. The Voynich manuscript is not just a puzzle. It is a mirror reflecting our hunger to understand, to decode, to explain the unknown. And perhaps in some way, it was meant to do exactly that. Not to reveal answers, but to remind us of the limits of what we know. The tomb of Jingaskin, a conqueror's vanishing act. Across the sweeping grasslands of northeastern Mongolia, the wind moves like a ghost, soft, steady, unyielding. The land rolls outward in every direction, unbroken by city or monument. Wild horses run free, and eagle hunters still ride beneath skies that seem untouched by time. But hidden somewhere beneath this vast, open horizon may lie one of history's greatest secrets, the final resting place of Jingaskin. He was born as Temujin sometime around 1162 into a world of tribal warfare, betrayal, and endless struggle. But through unmatched strategy, charisma, and ruthless ambition, he forged a new name for himself. Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, and created the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. His armies swept across Asia and into Europe, reshaping civilizations and rewriting the political and cultural map of the medieval world. And yet for all his power and presence in life, Jingaskin vanished in death. When he died in 1227 somewhere in the remote mountains of northern China or southern Mongolia, his body was hidden. According to legend, his funeral escort killed anyone they passed to preserve secrecy. Once the grave was completed, the soldiers who dug it were allegedly executed. The burial site was trampled by horses to erase all traces. Some accounts even claim that a river was diverted to flow over the tomb, burying it forever beneath the shifting soil. No stone marker, no monument, no written record of its location. It was the perfect disappearance. But why would one of the most influential men in history choose to vanish like this? Mongol custom may hold part of the answer. Genghis Khan, despite his global impact, was deeply tied to the traditions of his people. Mongols believed the earth was sacred and burials were meant to return a person to nature quietly without disturbance. For all his imperial ambitions, Genghis was at his core a man of the steppe. In death, he may have chosen humility, or perhaps his followers believed that his power would remain strongest if he could not be found. Centuries later, we are still searching. Historians have scoured ancient texts, satellite imagery has been deployed, and archaeological expeditions have ventured deep into the Mongolian wilderness. Most efforts have focused on the Kenny Mountains, a sacred region believed to be closely connected to his life and legacy. But the land resists intrusion. Many local Mongolians believe the tomb should remain untouched, that disturbing the grave of Jingaskin would bring misfortune or worse. In 2004, a team using ground-penetrating radar discovered what may have been a buried complex near the Onan River. Strange anomalies, walls, chambers, and even possible burial pits appeared beneath the surface, but no excavation followed. Permission was denied. To this day, the site remains undisturbed. Other expeditions have focused on the Ekarig or Great Taboo, a forbidden zone declared sacred during the time of Jengaskin and protected by royal guards for centuries. Even now, the region is remote, sparsely inhabited, and difficult to access. Could his tomb lie somewhere within those untouched valleys, shielded by centuries of reverence and secrecy? There are also theories, more speculative in nature, that suggest the tomb not be in Mongolia at all. Some have proposed that his body was brought farther west, buried in Central Asia near the Silk Road, or even in a hidden chamber beneath a now-lost fortress. Others imagine a vast underground mausoleum filled with gold and weapons concealed by the sands of the Gobi Desert. Still, no solid evidence has ever emerged, and that may be exactly how it was intended. What makes this mystery so compelling is not just the absence of physical proof, but the silence that surrounds it. Jengaskin was not merely a conqueror. He was a living legend in his own time. His name inspired fear across continents. He reshaped cities, toppled dynasties, and connected distant worlds through war, trade, and diplomacy. And yet, we do not know where he rests. There is something powerful in that silence. Something intentional. Perhaps the greatest emperor of the medieval world wished to dissolve into the land he loved. Perhaps his legacy, measured not in monuments, but in maps redrawn and nations born, is his true memorial. Or perhaps somewhere beneath the grass, an earth untouched and waiting, the tomb of Jengaskin remains intact, guarding secrets that have not seen the light in 800 years. The Antitherum mechanism, an ancient computer from the deep sea. Beneath the turquoise waters off the coast of the tiny Greek island of Antither, the sea is calm, concealing secrets that have rested for millennia. Jagged rocks rise from the seafloor, cloaked in coral and silence. In 1901, sponge divers working near the island's cliffs descended into these depths and found something unexpected. The wreckage of an ancient Roman-era ship. Its hull long rotted, its cargo scattered across the seabed like the bones of a lost civilization. Among its statues and bronze armor, one object stood apart. It didn't gleam. It wasn't beautiful. In fact, it was easy to overlook. Just a lump of corroded bronze and rotted wood fused together by centuries underwater. It was sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens along with the other finds. No one paid it much attention. Not at first, but as conservators slowly separated the encrusted fragments, they began to see something strange. Inside the corroded bronze was a complex arrangement of gears, teeth cut with precision, axles and dials, tiny inscriptions in ancient Greek. What they had found buried beneath 2,000 years of salt and silence would become known as the Antitherum mechanism. To this day, no one fully understands it. Dated to roughly the 2nd century BC, the Antitherum mechanism is widely considered the world's oldest known analog computer. Its surviving fragments, now 82 pieces in total, are part of a device so intricate it seems almost impossible for its time. Using a series of interlocking gears, the mechanism could track the movements of the sun, the moon, and possibly even the planets. It could predict lunar eclipses, calculate the timing of the Olympic Games, and follow the 19-year Metonic cycle with extraordinary accuracy, all from a device no larger than a shoebox. And yet, no other machine like it has ever been found from the ancient world. How was it built? Who had the knowledge and the tools to design such an object in an age when iron was still rare and astronomical theories were rudimentary? Its inscription suggests it was made in the Greek-speaking world, possibly on the island of Rhodes. Some believe it may have been linked to the school of Hipparchus, the 2nd century BC astronomer who proposed early models of planetary motion. Others point to Archimedes himself, long believed to have created marvelous mechanical devices lost to time, but none of the writings from antiquity mention anything like the Antitherum mechanism. Could it be that ancient civilizations possessed a level of technological sophistication we have yet to fully recognize? Mainstream historians tread cautiously. They argue that while the mechanism is extraordinary, it may have been a unique object, perhaps created by a single brilliant mind whose work was never replicated. The knowledge, they say, may have existed only briefly before being lost in the fires and upheavals of empire. But this explanation raises new questions. If such an advanced machine was possible in the 2nd century BC, why are there no records of it being used, copied, or even discussed? Why was its technology not adopted more widely in the ancient world? And what else might have existed only to be lost before history could remember it? In recent years, modern imaging technologies, X-rays, 3D modeling, and surface scanning have revealed more of the mechanism's internal structure. Researchers have reconstructed what they believe to be its full layout. Over 30 bronze gears, precision cut, some rotating in epicycles to mimic the irregular motion of celestial bodies. The inscriptions, barely legible, reference phases of the moon in astronomical events. One panel may even serve as an eclipse predictor, complete with a rotating dial that identifies the kind of eclipse, solar or lunar, total or partial. It is in essence a cosmological machine, a map of the heavens in metal and motion. And yet, despite all this progress, so much remains unclear. Was the Anti-Thera mechanism a one-of-a-kind creation? Was it part of a broader tradition of lost engineering? Were there others like it destroyed in the wreck, or simply undiscovered? And perhaps most haunting of all, what else has the sea swallowed that we've yet to find? The Holy Grail, a quest for the tangible divine. The air is heavy with incense. Candles flicker along stone walls. Somewhere in the stillness, a chalice rests, simple, ancient, possibly forgotten. It may be hidden in a remote monastery, locked away in a cathedral's vault, or buried beneath layers of history in a landscape we no longer recognize. Or perhaps it never existed at all, and yet the idea of the Holy Grail endures. It is more than an object. It is a question, a symbol, a mirror of longing. For over 8 centuries, poets, kings, crusaders, and scholars have pursued it, not always for what it is, but for what it represents, the promise of divine mystery made tangible. But what is the Holy Grail? The earliest stories tell of a vessel used by Jesus at the Last Supper, a cup perhaps wooden, perhaps stone or silver. Later legends claim it was used again at the foot of the cross, used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch Christ's blood as it fell. From there, the Grail becomes something else entirely. A relic hidden away, guarded by secret orders, protected by knights sworn to silence. Its name first appears in medieval literature. The 12th century poet introduced it in his unfinished epic Persal, describing a mysterious object carried in procession through a lord's castle. He called it a grail, a term as ambiguous as the stories that followed. Later authors expanded the tale. In the hands of Woolrum Vines, the Grail was no longer a cup, but a stone with miraculous powers. In the Vulgate Cycle and Lamor Darthur, it became the object of King Arthur's greatest quest, a divine prize only the purest knight could find. Over time, the Grail's image solidified, a chalice glowing, eternal, said to bring healing, wisdom, or immortality to the one who finds it. But if such a cup ever existed, where is it now? Some believe it was taken to Glastonbury in England, hidden by Joseph of Arimathea, who according to legend founded the first Christian church there. Others trace its path through southern France, connecting it to the Cathars, a heretical Christian sect wiped out in the 13th century into the mountain fortress of Monagar, where some say Grail's secrets were lost in fire. Still others point to the Knights Templar. Formed in the early 12th century, the Templars were warrior monks who guarded pilgrims and acquired vast wealth and influence. Rumors swirled that they protected powerful relics, perhaps even the Grail itself. When the order was disbanded and its members arrested in the early 1300s, many believe their treasures vanished with them. Could the Holy Grail have been among them? A few artifacts have laid claim to the title. One is the chalice of Valencia, held in a Spanish cathedral and venerated for centuries. Made of agate with gold additions, It dates to the first centuries AD. Some researchers believe it fits the period and description of a vessel used in the ancient Near East. Another is the Sacro Catino, or Sacred Basin, a green glass dish kept in Genoa, long believed to be the Grail until chemical testing revealed it was likely Islamic glass from the Middle Ages. Each object carries both reverence and doubt. None have offered definitive proof, but perhaps the Grail was never meant to be found. Some scholars argue the Holy Grail was never a physical object at all, but rather a spiritual metaphor, an allegory for divine grace, enlightenment, or moral purity. The medieval romances may not have intended a literal quest, but a symbolic one, a journey into the soul, not the world. And yet others remain convinced that there is more to the story. Could the Holy Grail be real? Buried in a hidden chamber beneath a ruined abbey, locked in a Vatican vault, lost in the shifting sands of ancient Jerusalem? Or might it be something we've passed by again and again, misnamed, misidentified, misunderstood? The Grail has crossed into countless stories, medieval and modern, sacred and secular. It has become a beacon in films, novels, and conspiracies, a symbol of ultimate truth hidden just out of reach. But the heart of the mystery remains unchanged. Why do we search for the Grail? Is it the relic we seek, or the possibility that something sacred can be touched even in a world filled with uncertainty? And if such a thing were ever found, if someone were to hold the Holy Grail in their hands, would it satisfy the longing that created it? Or would the true Grail remain somewhere else? In the stories, in the silence, in the hope that there's still something holy waiting to be discovered. The lost Templar treasure, vanishing wealth of a powerful order. In the heart of Paris, just a few quiet blocks from the banks of the Seine, there once stood a fortress known as the Temple. Its towers now, long gone, once housed knights draped in white cloaks marked with red crosses. They were warrior monks, guardians of pilgrims, and stewards of secrets. And it was here in the year 1307 that the downfall of the Knights Templar began. Before dawn, on October 13th, soldiers acting under the orders of King Philip IV stormed Templar strongholds across France. Thousands were arrested, their leaders were tortured, their grandmaster, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake. And with that, one of the most powerful organizations of the medieval world was brought to a sudden and brutal end. But one question remains. What happened to their treasure? For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars had amassed vast wealth. Donations from nobles, revenues from land holdings, spoils from crusades, and ties from across Christendom. They established one of the earliest international banking systems. They held castles, gold, documents, and possibly even relics said to hold spiritual power. And yet, when the king's men arrived to seize it, the treasure was gone. No gold, no scrolls, no reliquaries, nothing. Was it moved before the arrests, hidden in secret tunnels? Was it ever material in the first place? Or something more elusive, more symbolic? The mystery begins with the scale of Templar influence. Founded in the early 12th century, the Order of the Knights Templar was established to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But they soon grew into something much greater, an independent multinational force, answering only to the Pope. They controlled ports, trade, routes, and stronghold from Jerusalem to London. Their wealth, however, made them a target. King Philip of France, heavily in debt to the Templars, feared their power. When he moved against them, it was swift and coordinated. But his plan hinged on one assumption, that the treasure would be within reach. And yet, even after weeks of interrogations, torture, and inquisitions, no detailed record of the treasure's fate ever emerged. Some point to the port of La Rochelle, where Templar ships were last seen days before the arrests. Could they have fled by sea, carrying the treasure westward to Portugal, to Scotland, or even across the Atlantic? Others suggest the riches were buried beneath their fortresses, sealed behind stone walls, or lost in subterranean crypts. In recent centuries, excavations of old Templar sites have uncovered hidden chambers. But no treasure, only silence. The Church of Sainte-Marie-Madeleine in Rennes-Lateau, a small village in southern France, has long been linked to rumors of Templar gold. Local legends speak of strange wealth, secret codes in the church's decoration, and underground vaults, but investigations have offered more speculation than certainty. And then there is the chapel at Rosslyn in Scotland. Built in the 15th century by the Sinclair family, long rumored to have Templar connections, the chapel's stonework is filled with strange carvings, green men, stars, and unidentifiable plants. Some believe the Templar treasure, or at least part of it, was hidden beneath Rosslyn's foundations, safeguarded by a lineage of quiet protectors. Still, no proof has surfaced. The idea of the Templar treasure has been transformed over time, expanded from golden relics to something more mythic. Some claim it included the Holy Grail. Others say it was ancient knowledge, scrolls from the Temple of Solomon, or evidence that could shake the foundations of the church itself. These theories, of course, live mostly at the edges. Difficult to verify, impossible to dismiss outright. What we do know is this: the Templars were more than just soldiers. They were recordipers, builders, thinkers. They left behind a trail of architecture, rituals, and symbols that still stir curiosity today. Their sudden disappearance left a void into which centuries of speculation have poured. Why didn't they resist? Why were they so easily undone after 200 years of power? And if they foresaw their end, as some writings suggest, could they have hidden not just their wealth, but their legacy? The dancing plague of 1518, a city gripped by uncontrollable movement. The summer of 1518 settled hot and heavy over the city of Strasbourg in what was then part of the Holy Roman Empire. The cobblestone streets buzzed with the sounds of life. Market chatter, church bells, and the murmurs of a population worn thin by famine, disease, and political unrest. And then something strange began. It started with one woman. She stepped into a narrow street and began to dance. Not to music, not in joy. Her movements were frantic, compulsive, her eyes wide, her face blank. She danced for hours, then for days. By the end of the week, more had joined her. Dozens, then hundreds, men, women, even children. They danced in alleyways and open squares, in front of churches and markets. Their bodies twitched and convulsed with a rhythm no one could hear. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others broke bones. A few, it is said, danced themselves to death. It became known as the dancing plague of 1518. And to this day, no one knows exactly why it happened. Historical records confirm the event. Physicians of the time wrote of it with bafflement. City council records documented the deaths. Church leaders issued prayers. Doctors prescribed movement, believing the dancers were overheated and needed to dance the fever out. In a surreal response, authorities even hired musicians to accompany the afflicted, hoping structure might soothe what they thought was an imbalance of the humors. But the dancing didn't stop. It lasted for weeks. As the heat pressed on and bodies gave out, the city of Strasbourg became a stage for something no one could name. Part affliction, part performance, entirely unexplainable. Modern scholars have offered several theories. One of the most cited is ergot poisoning, a form of fungal contamination in rye bread that can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and delirium. The fungus known as Claves purpurea produces a chemical similar to LSD. Could the entire population have been affected by a mass foodborne toxin? It seems possible, except that ergot poisoning typically causes stiffness, not extended physical movement. It also does not explain why the victims danced in organized groups or why the episode repeated in lesser forms in other towns across medieval Europe. Another explanation points to mass psychogenic illness, a kind of shared psychological response to trauma, stress, or fear. The early 1500s were marked by widespread famine, outbreaks of disease, and religious anxiety. Strasbourg was no exception. The people were stretched thin, desperate, uncertain, and vulnerable. Could the dancing have been a subconscious release, a collective break from the unbearable weight of the world? Some historians believe so. They argue the dancers were victims not of a virus or poison, but of the human mind under pressure, channeling grief and fear into uncontrollable physical expression. But if so, why dancing? Why movement so violent that it led to injury or death? Theories grow more speculative from there. Some see a connection to religious ritual. Medieval Europe was thick with beliefs in saints and miracles. One saint in particular, Saint Vitus, was associated with dancing. Fits in strange convulsions. Could the dancers have believed themselves possessed? Were they enacting a misunderstood form of devotion? Or were they perhaps trying to avoid divine punishment? There are even those who suggest the phenomenon was triggered not by trauma or belief, but by something older, something deeper, a memory of ancient rites long suppressed by church doctrine, emerging like an echo from the human subconscious. Were these uncontrolled dances the resurfacing of a forgotten ritual, a cry from the collective past? And yet there is no conclusive evidence for any of it. All that remains are the records, the voices of bewildered city officials, the pleas of physicians, the fading echoes of feet pounding stone and rhythms no one could control. Some accounts suggest the dancers were eventually taken to a mountaintop shrine and made to walk in a procession, prayed over, blessed, and told to repent. After that, the epidemic began to subside. But the memory lingered. The dancing plague of 1518 was not the first incident of its kind, nor the last. Smaller outbreaks of choromania, as it came to be called, were recorded throughout the Middle Ages, but Strawberg remains the most extreme, the most haunting. The Man in the Iron Mask, France's most secretive prisoner, the Bastille, cold stone walls heavy with damp, echoing with the clink of chains and the hush of secrets. In the late 1600s, it stood as a symbol of absolute power, a fortress prison in the heart of Paris, where men disappeared not just from public life, but from memory. And somewhere inside, behind a locked door, there lived a prisoner who would become one of the most enduring enigmas in European history. He wore a mask, not of iron perhaps, but of velvet padded concealing. His face was never shown, his identity never revealed, not to guards, not to cellmates, not even perhaps to the man himself. In the end, we know him only as the Man in the Iron Mask. The story begins not in myth, but in documented fact. French state archives confirm that such a prisoner existed. He was held in multiple prisons across France. Pinal, the fortress of exiles, as Marguerite, and finally the Bastille. He was guarded by the same man throughout, Benignia d'Overdemar, a trusted officer in the service of the French crown. This prisoner arrived at Pignerol in 1669. Over the next 3 decades, he was transferred from fortress to fortress, always under Saint Mars' watchful eye. He received fine clothing. His quarters were modest but clean. He was treated with a strange mix of severity and respect, and always the mask remained. When he died in 1703, he was buried under the name Marquali. The gravestone was removed, the cell was scrubbed, the records redacted. All that remained was a trail of correspondence. Letters between Saint-Marm and officials at Versailles, cryptic and sparse. But one detail is repeated. The prisoner must be kept in isolation. No face may be seen. No name spoken aloud. Why? What could this man have known or been that required such extreme secrecy? Over the centuries, dozens of theories have emerged. Some suggest he was a nobleman who had fallen out of favor. Perhaps Count Errol Antonio Maioli, an Italian diplomat who betrayed French secrets and was imprisoned around the same time. But Maioli was publicly arrested and identified. He was no secret. Others believe the man was a valet punished for overhearing something he was never meant to know. Perhaps a state secret, perhaps something more intimate. But could a servant, however unfortunate, justify such lifelong concealment? Then the theories grow more speculative. Some say he was a twin, a royal twin, a brother to King Louis XIV. In this version of the story, the Man in the Iron Mask was hidden from birth or soon after to preserve the line of succession, a spare who became a threat. If true, it would explain the mask, the treatment, the silence. But no official record of such a birth exists. And yet, could have been erased? Voltaire, imprisoned in the Bastille himself, later claimed the masked man was indeed a royal sibling. Alexander Dumas took the idea and spun it into fiction, immortalizing the story in his novels. But fiction, no matter how compelling, is not fact. And still, the facts themselves are elusive. We know that Saint-Mars took extraordinary care to ensure the man's identity remained hidden. We know that the prisoner lived for over 3 decades under these conditions, that he wrote letters under false names, that his meals were delivered with strict protocol, that he died quietly with no visitors and no family. Even now, more than 300 years later, the French archives contain only fragments. Names redacted, orders coded, a shadow cast over history, and yet the story endures. Why does the man in the iron mask captivate us still? Is it the cruelty of his isolation, the theatrical detail of the mask itself, or is it the idea that the most powerful monarchy in Europe had something or someone it could not afford the world to see? The origin of the Black Death, tracing the source of a pandemic. It began quietly, a sickness moving through villages, then cities, a fever, a swelling, a stench of death that clung to the air. By the time it reached the ports of Italy in 1347, it had already crossed mountains, rivers, and kingdoms. Within a year, half of Europe would lie in graves. The Black Death, a name whispered with fear and remembered with dread. It was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. But for all we know about its devastation, one question remains more elusive than ever. Where did it come from? For centuries, the Black Death was thought to have originated in the East, perhaps in the vast steppes of Central Asia. Trade caravans and ships became its vessels, carrying the plague westward along the Silk Road and maritime routes. Historians pointed to the siege of Kaffa, a Genoese trading post in Crimea, where Mongol forces are said to have catapulted infected corpses over the city walls. An early and chilling form of biological warfare. From there, it spread with alarming speed. Messina, Genoa, Marseilles then. The heartlands of Europe. No village was too remote, no fortress too fortified. It moved through every layer of society from beggars to bishops, farmers to kings. But was the siege of Kaffa truly the origin or just one chapter in a story that began much earlier? Recent discoveries have shifted the conversation. In 2022, researchers analyzing ancient DNA from cemeteries in modern-day Kyrgyzstan found traces of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the plague. The remains were dated to the 1330s, a decade before the pandemic reached Europe. This has led some scientists to propose a new point of origin, the Tian Shan Mountains, near the ancient trading routes of the East. But even this answer opens more questions. Why then? Why there? What caused a relatively localized disease to erupt into a global catastrophe? Some suggest it was climate. During the early 1300s, the world experienced what is now called the Little Ice Age. Cooler temperatures disrupted ecosystems, affecting rodents and the fleas that fed on them. Plague. Reservoirs may have shifted, pushing the bacteria into new regions and new hosts. But was this environmental change enough on its own? Others point to the explosion of trade under the Mongol Empire. The so-called Pax Mongolica connected east and west with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Silk, spices, and silver moved through these routes, and perhaps so did disease. In this view, the very forces that linked the world also doomed it. But there are still anomalies. In some places, the plague seemed to strike before trade routes could reasonably explain its arrival. In others, it spread far too quickly for the mechanisms of the time. The transmission of Yersinia pestis, typically spread by fleas on rats, struggles to account for the scale and speed of the devastation. Could there have been multiple forms of plague? Some historians believe so. Pneumonic plague, which spreads through droplets in the air, may have been more violent than its bubonic cousin. Some even speculate a now extinct strain could have existed, one that left few traces behind. There are more fringe theories, too. Some have wondered if the Black Death was not entirely natural. Was it released accidentally or otherwise by forces we don't fully understand? Ancient weaponization, a result of early medical experimentation. These ideas remain unproven, but they reflect something deeper. The sense that the Black Death doesn't quite behave the way we expect it to. The Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible, a monumental mystery. In a quiet, climate-controlled room in Stockholm's National Library, a single book rests behind glass. It is taller than most children, nearly 3 feet high, weighing over 160 pounds. Its pages, vellum, made from the skins of more than 160 animals, are yellowed with age, but intact. Their ink still dark, their letters as sharp and deliberate as the day they were written. This is the Codex Gigas, the giant book, but it is better known by a far more ominous name, the Devil's Bible. Created in the early 13th century, likely within the Benedictine monastery of Padlais in Bohemia, now the Czech Republic. The Codex Gigas is not just remarkable for its size. It is remarkable for what it contains. The entire Latin Vulgate Bible is included, yes, but so are other works. Medical treatises, historical texts, penitential laws, magical formulas, and exorcisms. It is a compendium of medieval knowledge, sacred and profane, collected between 2 covers. But the mystery is not just in the contents, it's in the creation. According to legend, the book was the work of a single monk, a man who, having broken his monastic vows, was sentenced to be walled alive within the monastery. Facing death, he begged for a second chance, not to escape punishment, but to redeem himself by creating a book that would glorify the monastery for eternity. The abbot agreed, but only if the book could be finished in a single night, a task by all measures impossible. And so the monk worked. But as the night deepened and the hour grew late, he realized he could not complete it alone. And so he made a bargain. He did not pray to God. He called upon something else, the devil. The tale says, the book was finished by morning, and in the center of the CX Gigas, taking up an entire page, is an illustration, striking, unsettling, and utterly unlike anything else in medieval Christian manuscripts. It is the devil. He stands alone on the page, towering with green claws, red-tipped horns, and bulging eyes. He wears nothing but a loin-cloth of man's fur, the fur of royalty. He stares straight ahead, mouth open in a grim, knowing smile. Why would such a figure be placed in a religious manuscript? No accompanying page depicts heaven. No angel mirrors him. The devil is framed by silence, alone in his page, unopposed, unchallenged. Is it merely symbolic, a warning of sin and damnation, or something more literal? Scholars have examined the Codex Gigas for centuries. They marvel at its calligraphy, all uniform, written in what appears to be a single hand. No inconsistencies in ink color, no signs of fatigue, no shift in style, as though it had been written in one continuous flow, uninterrupted by sleep or time. Some estimate it would take a trained scribe over 20 years to complete such a manuscript. Others, more conservatively, suggest 5. But in either case, the idea that one man could complete it in a single night seems impossible unless he had help. Of course, historians caution against the supernatural. They point to the context of the time, a monastic culture where devotion and discipline could span decades. The book may have been the life's work of a single monk copied slowly page by page in near monastic isolation. But even this explanation leaves questions. Why the size? Why include exorcism rituals beside Scripture? Why that image so large, so deliberate? The book has had a troubled history. After its creation in Bohemia, it was moved to the monastery at Jevnov and later to the Royal Library in Prague. In the 17th century, it was seized as war booty by Swedish forces during the 30 Years' War and brought to Stockholm, where it remains today. In 16987, during a fire at Stockholm's royal castle, the Codex was thrown from a window to save it from the flames. It survived barely. A few pages were lost, others singed, but the heart of the book, the secrets it carries, remained intact. Some have suggested the missing pages once contained forbidden texts, perhaps apocryphal gospels, or a second depiction to balance the devils. Others believe the pages may have been removed intentionally to silence a message too dangerous to preserve. And so the book endures, monumental, complete, and incomplete at once. Its creation shrouded in uncertainty, its purpose unclear. Was it a sacred text, a library in miniature, a penance, or a product of obsession? The lost Templar fleet? Where did the ships go? The port of La Rochelle faces the Atlantic with quiet dignity. Salt-swept and ancient, its stone towers still guard the harbor where gulls circle and tides roll in and out as they have for centuries. But in the early morning haze of October 13th, 1307, something else stirred in these waters. Something that has never been fully accounted for. According to scattered chronicles and whispered reports, the ships of the Knights Templar anchored here vanished just before the order itself was crushed by the crown of France. This is the mystery of the lost Templar fleet. At the time, the Order of the Knights Templar was among the most powerful institutions in Europe. Formed during the Crusades to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, they grew into something much greater, an independent multinational force, answering only to the Pope. They controlled ports, trade routes, and strongholds from Jerusalem to London. But power breeds enemies. By the early 1300s, tensions between the Templars and King Philip V of France had reached a boiling point. The king owed the order vast sums of money and feared their influence. On Friday, the 13th of October, in a coordinated strike, he ordered the arrest of every Templar in France. But when soldiers reached La Rochelle, something was missing. The fleet, reportedly consisting of up to 18 ships, had vanished. No logs were found. No ships remained in the harbor. No sightings were recorded in the days following. For a military end, religious order known for its precision, the disappearance of an entire naval force raised immediate questions. Where had they gone, and what were they carrying? Some historians argue the fleet's vanishing is little more than legend, that the records are incomplete, that the number of ships was likely exaggerated, and that the idea of a mass escape is wishful thinking. But others point to the timing. Could it be that the Templars, aware of the king's intentions, had prepared their escape in advance? The order was known for its secrecy. Its members communicated in coded letters, guarded their financial records, and had outposts in almost every major European port. If any group had the infrastructure to vanish deliberately, it was them. So, where might they have gone? One theory places them in Portugal. There, King Denis Frank resisted papal pressure to persecute the Templars. In fact, he allowed them to regroup under a new name, the Order of Christ. Many believe this was a calculated move to preserve the Templar network and possibly their treasure. Another theory suggests the fleet sailed north to Scotland. At the time, Scotland was in conflict with both the English crown and the church. It would have offered refuge to those fleeing both political and religious persecution. Some even speculate that the Templars fought alongside Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, though evidence remains circumstantial. Then there are those who claim the fleet crossed the Atlantic. Decades before Columbus, maps and myths spoke of land beyond the Western Ocean. Could the Templars have reached the shores of North America? Some theorists point to carvings in Nova Scotia, stone crosses in New England, and the mysterious layout of the supposed Templar-linked Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland as clues in a trail leading westward. It is a romantic idea, Templars as explorers of a new world, but it remains highly speculative. Still, the question persists, what did the fleet carry? If the Templars were indeed forewarned, did they escape with gold, with relics, with scrolls, or artifacts from the Holy Land? Could the fleet have been tasked with hiding something, not just from the king, but from history? Some believe the fleet's disappearance is tied to other Templar mysteries, the lost treasure, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant. These claims, while captivating, often blur the line between history and legend. Yet the power of the story lies in its possibility in what we don't know. What we do know is this. After the arrest in 1307, the official records fall silent. The ships are never accounted for. The ports list no arrivals. The order dissolves under persecution. but something about its end feels incomplete. La Rochelle, once a bustling hub of Templar commerce, becomes a quiet city once again. The towers still stand, watching the sea, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the fate of the Templar fleet is still unknown. The Cathar treasure, secrets buried in the Pyrenees. High above the Languedoc plain, the ruins of Monégar cling to the mountaintop like a scar. Its broken walls and shattered towers gaze down on forests and valleys once soaked in blood. The wind howls through the stone corridors where once centuries ago a different kind of faith dared to take root. Here in the early 13th century, the Cathars made their final stand. They called themselves the Good Christians. A dualist sect of Christianity, the Cathars believed the material world was a prison, a creation of an evil force. True purity, they taught, was found in rejecting the physical, embracing the spiritual, and living in absolute simplicity. They opposed the wealth and corruption of the Catholic Church. They rejected the sacraments, the cross, even the idea that Christ had ever possessed a human body. To the Church, they were heretics. To the people of Languedoc, there was something more. Teachers, healers, mystics. Their popularity grew. So did the fear in Rome. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade, a campaign not against Muslims or pagans, but against fellow Christians. Entire towns were wiped out. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. The region was ravaged by inquisitors, its culture erased piece by piece. But some Cathars survived, and as they retreated deeper into the mountains, a legend began to form. It is said that the Cathars possessed a great treasure, not a hoard of coins or gems, but something older. Some believe it was a sacred text, perhaps a lost gospel or a version of the Book of John, unlike any known to the Church. Others suggest it was the Holy Grail itself, a spiritual relic passed down through secret hands. Whatever it was, the legend holds that the treasure was hidden before Montgar fell in 1244. After months of siege by Crusader forces, the fortress was finally overrun. Over 200 Cathars who refused to recant were burned alive at the foot of the mountain in what came to be called the Field of the Stake. But just before the final assault for Cathar Perfecti, the most devout spiritual leaders are said to have escaped down the cliffs at night, carrying with them the treasure of the Cathars, and then nothing. No sign, no trail, only silence. What was it that they carried? Some believe the treasure lies buried in the caves of the nearby Sabarthese Mountains, a place long associated with ritual and myth. Others point to Run Lachadou, a village steeped in its own shadowy legends. Still others believe the Cathar secret was not physical but spiritual, passed from generation to generation in whispers and symbols. There are documents, fragments of letters, records of inquisitions, testimonies from frightened villagers. They speak of relics of knowledge forbidden by Rome, of something too dangerous to fall into the hands of the Church. But no definitive proof has ever surfaced. Modern searches have yielded tantalizing clues. Hollow chambers hidden beneath old Cathar sites. Strange inscriptions carved into cave walls. Coins, artifacts, texts written in unknown ciphers, but nothing that can be definitively linked to the final flight for Monsieur. Skeptics argue that the treasure is a fabrication, a romantic myth born out of tragedy, that the Cathars, poor and persecuted, had nothing to hide. But the consistency of the legend told across centuries and regions is hard to dismiss. Could a secret have survived all this time? And if so, what truth does it conceal? The mystery of the Cathar treasure is not just about gold or relics. It is about a lost worldview, a faith that dared to reject power and hierarchy, a people who chose death rather than compromise their beliefs. It is about what vanishes when an idea is destroyed and what might survive beneath the ashes. The lead books of Granada, Forgery, Faith, or Hidden Truth. High above the city of Granada, the whitewashed chapel of Sacramento overlooks a winding mosaic of tiled roofs, cypress trees, and distant mountains. The air here carries the scent of wild thyme and old stone. From this hilltop, the past seems close, almost reachable. And it was here in the late 16th century that something extraordinary was discovered. Inside a small cave beneath the chapel, workers found a set of sealed lead tubes. When opened, they revealed thin sheets of lead carefully beaten into the shape of books. Each page was inscribed with strange writing, an unfamiliar script that mixed Arabic characters with Latin and symbols unlike any known alphabet. Alongside these lead texts were relics, bones said to belong to early Christian martyrs, crosses, and wooden boards etched with cryptic messages. The discovery stunned the local clergy. What were these objects? Who had buried them? And what secrets did the books contain? This was the beginning of the mystery, now known as the Libros Plumillos de Granada, the lead books of Granada. The text, once translated with great effort, told an astonishing story. They claimed that long before the Arab conquest of Spain, in the first centuries after Christ, a group of early Christians had lived and preached in the region. These followers were described as devout, multilingual, and peaceful. They bore teachings that emphasized tolerance between Christians and Muslims, and they revered the Virgin Mary above all. The messages were apocalyptic in tone, warning of dark times ahead, but promising eventual unity through divine wisdom. For many, it seemed like a miracle. Here at the intersection of Christian and Islamic worlds was a document that bridged the divide, a vision of harmony embedded in the very soil of Granada. Clerics began to see the lead books as divine confirmation of Spain's sacred destiny. Processions were held, pilgrimages made, and the chapel of Saker was elevated to a site of holy significance. But not everyone was convinced. From the beginning, the Vatican expressed skepticism. The strange mixture of languages, the Marian emphasis, and a lack of known authorship all raised alarms. Eventually, a full investigation was ordered. The Church, wary of heresy and falsification, examined the texts over decades. By the 1680s, the verdict came down. The lead books were declared forgeries. They were banned, locked away in the Vatican's archives. Those associated with their discovery and translation were discredited or dismissed. The relics remained at Sacramento, but the texts themselves were removed from public view. And yet, the questions never faded. Who created the lead books? If they were indeed forged, the forger or forgers possessed extraordinary knowledge. The texts combined theological nuance, historical allusion, and linguistic innovation. The metal itself had been carefully shaped, folded, and inscribed with tools few could master, and the messages, complex, mystical, and inclusive, seemed far ahead of their time. One theory points to a group of Morisco, Muslims who had converted to Christianity after the Reconquista, many of whom were still persecuted and distrusted. These crypto-Muslims may have forged the texts as a way to protect their culture and faith under the guise of early Christianity, blending Islamic and Christian elements into a shared origin story. If true, the lead books become less of a hoax and more of a survival mechanism, an attempt to rewrite memory, to reshape the past into something that could offer safety. Others argue the books may have originated within mystical Christian sects interested in Marian theology and apocalyptic visions. The esoteric tone of the text bears similarities to Gnostic writings long suppressed by the Church. Still others point to more speculative ideas. Were the books truly forgeries? Or was the Church's rejection a political decision? Do the messages point to a deeper historical truth that challenge religious orthodoxy too strongly to be tolerated? Modern scholars remain divided. In recent years, the lead books have been studied again using non-invasive imaging, meta-analysis, and digital linguistics. But no consensus has emerged. The lead is old, but not definitively dated. The script resists straightforward classification. The texts themselves, part theology, part prophecy, refuse easy interpretation. And so the mystery endures. The books remain in the Vatican Library, rarely displayed, their pages still closed to the world. The ghost army of Aginord, witnesses to the unseen. The plain near Agincourt lies. low and open, bordered by woods and ridges. Quiet now, but once drenched in rain, blood, and confusion. On October 25th, 1415, this patch of land saw one of the most improbable military victories in medieval history. King Henry V of England, outnumbered and half-starved, faced the might of the French nobility. Thousands of knights and soldiers in gleaming armor. The odds were crushing, and yet the English won. Historians still marvel at the tactics, the narrow field, the long bows, the mud, that swallowed horses and steel alike. But buried within the records and letters from that day is something more peculiar. A fragment of legend, a detail that doesn't fit. A ghostly army. Several chroniclers, both English and French, make note of a strange moment during the height of battle. As the fighting turned against the French and panic began to spread through their ranks, some soldiers claimed they saw additional figures appear behind the English lines, a silent host. Some said they looked like monks, others like armored warriors cloaked in shadow. They did not speak. They did not move to attack. But their presence, unexpected and unexplained, seemed to shift the morale of the battlefield. Were they reinforcements? No one could say. Their banners were unknown, their colors unfamiliar, and when the battle was over, they were nowhere to be found. Could have been a hallucination, a trick of light and fear. Perhaps the battle was fought in cold and rain. Tensions were high. The French believed they had already won, and when defeat came, it came so suddenly that chaos must have filled the senses. But the reports are surprisingly consistent. Descriptions of shadowy figures of a force that seemed to arrive, then vanish. Some English accounts frame it as divine intervention, that St. George himself had appeared to rally the English against the French, that the ghost army was heaven-sent, warriors of God in service to the rightful king. The idea was convenient, politically useful, and resonated with a population eager to see their king's victory as chosen by fate. But other versions are more subdued. They do not speak of saints or angels, but of a quiet, unsettling presence. A second army, one not seen by all, but by enough to raise questions that persist centuries later. Could there be a natural explanation? Fog and weather have long played tricks on the eyes. The wooded edges of the battlefield might have revealed and concealed figures at strange angles. Reinforcements from nearby villages may have appeared and departed without formal record, acting on local loyalties. Or perhaps the story grew in the retelling, warping like smoke, shaped by memory and need. And yet, Agincourt is not the only place where such stories emerge. Throughout medieval history, tales of ghostly armies are surprisingly common. Entire hosts seen marching across hillsides. Cavalry heard galloping through forests with no riders in sight. Phantom soldiers appearing before battles only to vanish at dawn. In Celtic tradition, they're called the Slew, spirits of the restless dead drawn to conflict. In Anglo-Saxon lore, they are Harthing, spectral war bands who pass judgment on the living. Could the story of Agincourt's ghost army be part of this wider tapestry? Or did something more unusual happen on that muddy field? Some more speculative theories suggest time slips, moments when the fabric between past and present thins, that those shadowy figures might not have been ghosts, but echoes of battles past or battles yet to come. Others wonder if the story was planted, a kind of medieval psychological warfare designed to confuse, to elevate the victory beyond the realm of mere tactics. And yet, for all the theories, no one truly knows. The battlefield itself has yielded countless artifacts, arrows, armor fragments, even bones. But no evidence of a second army, no discarded banners, no insignias, nothing physical to confirm the presence of the silent host. The cadaver sinned, a trial of the dead in the Vatican. The Basilica of St. John Laden in Rome has seen centuries of ceremony, crowns placed on emperors, blessings whispered over kings, and the shaping of doctrine. That echoes through time. But in the year 897, this sacred space was transformed into something else entirely. A courtroom, and in the center of it, a corpse clothed in papal robes, propped up on a throne. The body of Pope Formosus, dead for over 9 months, sat in eerie silence as he was placed on trial by his successor. This event would come to be known as the cadaver sinned. Historians confirm it happened. The records are clear, even if the motives remain murky. Pope Stephen VI, newly elevated to the throne of St. Peter, ordered the exhumation of his predecessor. Formosus's decaying body was removed from its tomb, dressed in ceremonial vestments, and brought before a tribunal of bishops. An appointed deacon stood by the corpse to speak on its behalf. What followed was a grotesque reenactment of justice. Charges were read aloud, accusations made, among them perjury, violating canon law, and ascending to the papacy unlawfully. The verdict, unsurprisingly, was guilty. Formosus's papacy was annulled. All acts and ordinations performed during his time as pope were declared void. His body, stripped of its garments, had the 3 fingers used for blessings cut from his right hand. Then, in a final act of degradation, it was cast into the Tiber River. Why? What had driven the living to put the dead on trial? The political landscape of the late 9th century was fraught with chaos. The Carolingian Empire was crumbling. Rome was caught between powerful factions vying for control of the papacy. Formosus had made enemies, chief among them the family of Duke Guy of Spolo, whose influence over the papacy he had tried to curtail. Stephen, elevated by the Spolitans, may have acted out of loyalty or vengeance. But even within the volatile norms of the time, the cadaver sinned stands apart. Some accounts portray Stephen as unstable, raving, obsessed with Formosus's legacy. Others suggest he was manipulated by external forces, a puppet used to wipe away a predecessor's decisions that had proven inconvenient. But the act itself remains difficult to explain by logic alone. Why not simply revoke Formosus' decrees? Why the theater? Why the corpse? Was it an attempt to rewrite history through ritual humiliation? A symbolic statement that even in death, power could be undone? Or was it something deeper, something rooted in the medieval fear of the afterlife, of divine order disrupted? There are stranger theories still. Some have speculated that the trial was more than political, that Formosus had been suspected of heresy or dangerous knowledge, and that condemning. His body was a way of severing his influence from the realm of the living. That the ritual humiliation was meant not just for Rome, but for the heavens. If so, what did Formosus know? Whatever the true motivation, the consequences of the cadaver synod rippled outward. Public opinion turned swiftly against Pope Stephen. The grotesque spectacle horrified even those used to ecclesiastical drama. Within a year, Stephen was imprisoned and strangled in his cell. Formosus's body, recovered from the river, was rearied with honor. His decrees were restored, and the synod itself was declared invalid. Yet, the event remains etched into the historical record, bizarre, macabre, and unresolved. No single account explains it fully. The letters, the chronicles, the papal bulls, none offer clarity. They present fact without motive, detail without meaning, as though even the church itself did not fully understand what it had done. The Lost Book of Merlin, whispers of ancient knowledge. In the wind-swept hills of Wales and the moss-covered ruins of forgotten abbeys, the name Merlin lingers like fog. He is part of the soil, the stone, the myth, the prophet, the magician, the advisor to kings, half man, half mystery. But among the countless stories and songs written of him, there is one recurring thread that appears again and again, that Merlin left behind a book, a grimoire, a prophecy, a record of visions that transcended time. And somewhere it was said this book was hidden. The earliest hints appear in 12th century chronicles. Geoffrey of Monmouth, the Welsh cleric, whose perfidia Merlin brought Merlin into medieval literature, claimed to have accessed older, mysterious sources, texts written in the native tongue, and possibly one by Merlin himself. He spoke not just of visions, but of a book of ancient knowledge. Others, like Gerald of Wales, mentioned that certain monasteries in Britain housed prophetic writings attributed to a shadowy druidic figure whose name was not always spoken aloud. What did these books contain? Were they simply poetic riddles, political allegories cloaked as prophecy? Or was there something more, something closer to a map of the unseen? Later medieval texts began to embellish the idea. In French romances and Arthurian cycles, Merlin is said to have kept writings in strange scripts encoded and buried beneath sacred ground. In some versions, the book contains astrological calculations. In others, rituals and elemental commands, and always the knowledge it held was feared as much as it was desired. But was this book ever real? Some scholars believe the idea of the Book of Merlin may be symbolic, a literary device representing forbidden or forgotten knowledge, a metaphor for the lost pagan traditions suppressed by the Christian world. Others suggest that if it did exist, it may have been destroyed by design, burned by monks, buried by kings, erased by time, and yet fragments remain. In the British Library, the Red Book of Hurg, a medieval Welsh manuscript, contains passages about Myrddin, as he was originally known, speaking in riddles of a coming disaster, of hidden truths in a world out of balance. Another, the Black Book of Carthan, includes prophetic poems that some believe may have originated from an earlier oral tradition, one that once had a written form, but no full Book of Merlin has ever been found. Could it still exist? Some believe it might. A few accounts suggest the Knights Templar or their later incarnations sought to preserve older mystical texts, that a copy of Merlin's book was smuggled out of Britain during the time of the Norman invasion and hidden in a European monastery. Others claim that a version written in Agam, an ancient Celtic script, lies encoded within a stone labyrinth in Cornwall, protected by a druidic bloodline sworn to silence. There are even suggestions that Merlin's book was never meant to be read in the traditional sense, that it was carved into the landscape itself. Sacred groves aligned with stars, stones arranged as sentences, a language of light and shadow spoken through nature. But perhaps the most haunting possibility is this, that the Book of Merlin was real, and that its pages foretold events yet to come. The Curse of Jacques de Molay, Agranum's Final Judgment. The Ile seat in the heart of medieval Paris has always been a place where power gathers. Royal courts, cathedrals, prisons. The island has seen kings rise and fall, and faith tested by flame. On March 18th, 1314, a crowd assembled near the river Senator. The sky was gray, the wind sharp, and at the center of it all, a wooden scaffold stood waiting. Bound and silent, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was led to the stake. He had once commanded the most powerful military order in Christendom. The Templars had fought in the Crusades, guarded pilgrims, and established one of the earliest international banking systems. But now, after years of imprisonment, torture, and a forced confession, Dem faced a brutal end. As the flames were lit and the smoke began to rise, something strange was said to have happened. Eyewitnesses claimed that de Molay, instead of begging for mercy, turned to the crowd. With fire curling around his feet, he cried out, not in fear but in fury. He called for justice, and then he issued a curse. According to the earliest accounts, de Molay declared that Pope Clement of Firm, who had authorized the persecution of the Templars, and King Philip IV of France, who orchestrated their downfall, would both die within the year and be judged before God. Within weeks, the Pope fell ill and died. Within months, the king suffered a stroke and passed away. A coincidence, perhaps, but the deaths didn't stop there. Over the next 14 years, Philip's 3 sons, all of whom became kings, died young without producing stable heirs. The Capetian dynasty, which had ruled France for over 300 years, collapsed. The country descended into chaos, leading to the bloody 100 Years' War and a crisis of succession that would alter European history. Many began to speak of the Templar curse. Was it real? The idea of a dying man casting a curse is not unique to the Malay. Ancient traditions often depict final words as powerful, capable of binding fate or invoking divine justice. But in this case, the timing is striking. 2 of the most powerful men in Christendom dead within a year of burning their grandmaster alive. Some historians argue that Demel never uttered a curse, that the story was shaped and embellished later, perhaps by chroniclers seeking drama or by those who saw in the Templars a symbol of martyrdom. Others suggest the tale was born from guilt, that those who witnessed the execution unsettled by the injustice of it later believed or imagined that Demel had spoken a final prophecy. And when the death began, the story grew. But there is another possibility that the Templars, long rumored to possess arcane knowledge and relics of great power, had placed protections around their leadership. That demise's death triggered something, a spiritual mechanism, a sacred bond sealed with fire and blood. Could the Templars have left behind more than gold? Could they have woven their legacy into a pattern of vengeance? In the centuries that followed, the legend of the curse expanded. Secret societies claimed descent from the Templars. Occultists invoked the Grand Master's name in rituals. Writers from Voltaire to Umberto Eco retold the tale with fascination. And always at the center was that burning figure Jacques de Mole, calling out for justice from a P. The kingdom of Sturgeon, a mythical realm of the East. In the vaulted halls of medieval courts, among tapestries of lions and dragons, whispers of a distant kingdom traveled like smoke. It was said to lie beyond the known world, somewhere, past the lands of the Saris, through deserts too wide to cross, across rivers that ran with stones, a place ruled by a mighty king and priest, a man of unmatched wisdom, wealth, and Christian virtue. His name was Prester John. He was said to be both monarch and holy man, sovereign of a realm where the righteous lived in harmony and abundance. His kingdom overflowed with precious gems, healing springs, and beasts of fantastic kind. Griffins, unicorns, and phoenixes. No crime marred his lands. No injustice took root. His people were Christian, devout, and protected by divine favor. But where was this kingdom? That question would consume generations of European monarchs, popes, and explorers alike. The legend of Prester John first took root in the 12th century. In 1165, a letter began circulating through the courts of Europe, purportedly written by Prester John himself and addressed to the Byzantine Emperor, Manuel I Cannas. The letter described his magnificent realm in vivid detail. 72 kings paid him tribute. His palace had columns of crystal, and his armies included archbishops and dragons. But it wasn't just fantasy. It also promised alliance. Sturgeon, it claimed, stood ready to join the Christian world in a final crusade against Islam. For the embattled rulers of Europe, locked in bitter struggles in the Holy Land. The idea of a powerful Christian monarch rising in the East was intoxicating. Hope turned to obsession. But was there any truth to the story? Some believe Prester John ruled somewhere in India, an ancient seed of exotic wonders and early Christian enclaves. Others placed him in Central Asia, perhaps as far as China, where the vast Mongol Empire was then beginning its rise. Envoys were dispatched. Letters carried east on caravans. Maps were redrawn to include the mythical kingdom. Some explorers even reported glimpses, cities carved of gold, temples untouched by time, mountains where crosses had been raised in secret, but no concrete evidence ever surfaced. And yet, the myth refused to die. By the 13th century, with the Mongol Empire expanding rapidly, many European thinkers linked Prester John with one of its mysterious cons. Could this powerful, seemingly invincible Eastern force be the long-awaited Christian king in disguise? Some missionaries believed so. Others were disappointed when the Mongols failed to embrace Christianity or actively fought against it. So the legend shifted again. This time it settled in Africa. By the 14th century, explorers and merchants turned their gaze to the Ethiopian highlands where a long-established Christian kingdom ruled by the Solomonic dynasty had resisted Islamic expansion for centuries. Ethiopia, already home to ancient churches and Christian texts, seemed to fit the mold. Portuguese explorers were especially intrigued. By the 15th century, they began reaching out, convinced that the emperor of Ethiopia was Prester John, or at least his descendant. But the Ethiopian kings denied the title. They were Christian, yes, isolated, yes, but they had never heard of Prester John. Still, maps across Europe began marking the region with his name. Crafters sketched mountain ranges and palaces with Christian crosses deep in the African interior. The kingdom had moved not because it had been found, but because it could not be let go. Was Prester John ever real? Most modern historians agree the legend was a fusion, an echo of early Christian hopes projected onto the unknown. Ancient tales of St. Thomas's mission to India, travelers' reports of distant monarchies, and the enduring desire for a powerful ally in the East combined to give shape to a myth that outlived its origin. But there are stranger theories. Some suggest the original letter attributed to Prester John may have been crafted deliberately, an early example of geopolitical propaganda written by European clergy or nobles to inspire hope and galvanize crusading efforts. Others wonder if the story was rooted in a real figure, perhaps a Nestorian bishop or king of a Christianized tribe in Central Asia. The collapse of those cultures beneath the tide of Mongol expansion may have erased any evidence. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, an ancient wonder defying rust. In the courtyard of the Kuti complex, just south of the modern sprawl of New Delhi, a solitary column rises quietly from the stone. At first glance, it may seem unremarkable, just over 7 m tall, unadorned at the top. Its base crowned by delicate carvings, nearly worn away by centuries of footsteps and wind. But this is no ordinary monument. This is the Iron Pillar of Delhi, an object that has baffled metallurgists, historians, and archaeologists alike. What makes the pillar remarkable is not its appearance, but its resilience. For over 1,600 years, it has stood beneath open skies, enduring monsoon rains, scorching summers in the humid air of northern India. And yet, despite being composed almost entirely of wrought iron, it has not rusted. Not in the way one would expect, not like any modern iron exposed to the elements. Why? That question, simple in form, complex in answer, has lingered since the pillar was first studied in detail by British engineers in the 19th century. Dating back to the Gupta period around the 4th century AD, the Iron Pillar bears an inscription in Sanskrit. It praises King Chandragupta, referring to him as a devotee of the god Vishnu and boasts of his military victories and moral virtue. But the identity of the king, though historically significant, is not the source of the mystery. It is the iron itself. How is such a massive structure forged during a time when industrial metallurgy, as we understand it today, did not exist? The pillar weighs over 6 tons and is composed of 9,972% pure wrought iron, an extraordinary level of purity for its era. There is no evidence of casting. Instead, it was likely forged through hammer welding, an arduous, labor-intensive process involving heating and joining large chunks of iron repeatedly hammered into shape. Even by modern standards, constructing something so large and enduring would require considerable planning, resources, and technical skill. But it is not just the construction that invites awe. It is the corrosion, or more precisely, the lack of it. Despite its age, the Iron Pillar shows minimal signs of rust. Thin surface patches do exist, but they have stabilized rather than spread. The surface, it seems, has developed a protective film over the centuries, an invisible armor of sorts. Some researchers believe this passive protective layer formed from a rare combination of high phosphorus content and low sulfur and manganese. This allowed a film of miso-white, a complex iron-hydrogen phosphate compound, to crystallize on the surface. In essence, the pillar protects itself. But how did ancient Indian metallurgists working without modern chemistry achieve such a feat? Some suggest it was intentional, part of a secret or lost technique passed down among blacksmith guilds, now vanished from history. Others argue it was accidental, an unintended consequence of the materials and smelting methods used at the time. Yet neither explanation feels complete. Could the craftsmen of the Gupta Empire have possessed a deeper understanding of iron than we give them credit for? Could the pillar represent a legacy of knowledge, now forgotten? Alternative theories abound. A few fringe thinkers propose that the pillar may not have originated in India at all, that it could have been transported from another now-lost civilization. Others whisper of celestial alignments in ancient science, suggesting the pillar was more than just a monument, but a tool or device of some kind left behind for reasons lost to time. The Alpine mummies of Saint-Michel de Morin preserved lives in stone. The village of Saint-Michel de Morin rests in a narrow valley in the French Alps where steep peaks cast long shadows across the stone walls of ancient chapels. The winters are hard here, the winds fierce. Time seems to move more slowly in this place, where churches cling to cliffs and villages remain mostly unchanged for centuries. It was in one of these churches, smell dedicated to the archangel protector of mountain people, that workers during restoration efforts in the 20th century uncovered something unexpected. Beneath the wooden floor of a side chapel, in a shallow crypt lay a cluster of remarkably preserved human remains. Not bones, bodies. Dozens of them, some still dressed in woolen tunics, some with hair and skin intact, faces caught in expressions of quiet repose, as if simply sleeping beneath the earth. They would come to be known as the Alpine mummies of Saint-Michel. At first, the discovery was attributed to chance: cold, dry air, stable temperatures, the right soil, natural mummification, preserved by the unique conditions of high-altitude burial. But as researchers studied the remains more closely, questions began to emerge. The bodies appear to date from the 14th to the 18th centuries, yet their level of preservation was inconsistent. Not all were equally mummified despite lying only inches apart. Some had organs still intact. Others showed signs of ritual preparation. A few had hands bound or folded in particular ways, more precise than one might expect from simple local burials. What were these people doing here, and why were they so well preserved? The church records were sparse, damaged by time, war, and neglect. They made vague mention of burials during plagues and harsh winters, but gave no details, no names, no rites, no explanation for why these individuals had been buried in such a small space, beneath a chapel, but not in marked tombs. Were they victims of an epidemic? Local villagers too poor for formal burials? Or were they something else? One theory posits that the crypt served as a temporary resting place. During winters when the ground outside was frozen solid and too difficult to dig, the bodies may have been stored here until spring thaw, but for some reason never moved. Another theory suggests a more deliberate intent. Some believe the people buried here were members of a forgotten religious sect, perhaps a local confraternity devoted to Saint Michael, whose rites included non-traditional burial customs. The care with which some of the bodies were arranged in the presence of religious medallions sewn into clothing seems to support this possibility, but others look deeper. Some speculate that the preserved bodies were tied to a hidden history of the region, an underground network of mystics, pilgrims, or monastics who passed through these valleys in secret, guided by visions and faith. The Alps, after all, have always held a kind of spiritual gravity. Hermits, visionaries, and monks once sought isolation here. Chapels were carved into rock faces. Saints were said to appear to shepherds in the snow. Could these mummies have been part of such a story? Quiet lives of devotion sealed in the earth. And then there are the stranger details. A few of the mummies bear signs of trauma, healed fractures, unusual scars, signs of manual labor mixed with deformities caused by malnutrition or repetitive motion. Some had copper or iron objects buried with them, inexplicably shaped and not easily identified. One bore a fragment of parchment in the folds of its clothing, faded nearly to illegibility, but containing what appeared to be fragments of a prayer knot, found in any known liturgical text. Had these people died of disease or something else? Had they been buried here because of who they were or what they believed? Even the location of the crypt remains curious. Though beneath the church, it was not originally constructed as a cry. The space seems to have been carved into the rock centuries earlier, its access sealed until the restoration work began. Had it always been intended as a burial chamber, Or was it repurposed during a time of crisis, war, plague, famine? The origin of the Basque language, a linguistic island in Europe. In the misty folds of the Western Pyrenees, where steep green valleys meet the Atlantic coast, a unique rhythm of speech echoes through villages built of stone. It flows through the narrow streets of towns like Bilbao, San Sebastian, and Bayonne, between mountains, over borders, and across centuries. It is not Spanish. It is not French. It is Euskara, the language of the Basque people, and no one knows exactly where it came from. Unlike every other language in Europe, Euskara is not Indo-European. It shares no provable ancestry with Latin, Greek, Celtic, or Germanic roots. Its grammar, vocabulary, and structure are entirely unique. It is not a derivative of something older. It is the older thing. Linguists call it a language isolate, a term that denotes its singularity but does little to explain its mystery. How did a language with no known relatives survive in the heart of Europe, surrounded by the shifting tides of empire, invasion, and cultural erasure? How did it endure? Through Roman conquest, Visigothic rule, Moorish expansion, and the rise of modern nation-states intact, unassimilated, and still deeply rooted? Some believe Euskara is the last living voice of pre-Indo-European Europe, a linguistic fossil that somehow survived when all others were swept away, a remnant of the languages spoken by hunter-gatherers and early farmers before the spread of Indo-European dialects around 4,000 years ago. If true, this would make Basque not just a curiosity, but a direct link to Europe's deepest past. But the theory, while compelling, raises further questions. If Euskara is a remnant of ancient Europe, why is it found only in this small mountainous pocket straddling Spain and France? What happened to the other languages of its kind? And why has no direct ancestral form of Euskara ever been discovered in archaeological or epigraphic record? The Roman Empire, so meticulous in its documentation, made note of many local languages, but mentions of Basque or its earlier forms are frustratingly scarce. Some believe the Romans may have mistaken the language for a variant of Iberian, a now extinct script and tongue once spoken across the Iberian Peninsula. But even Iberian, despite some similarities in sound, shows no concrete linguistic link to Basque. Could the BAS have arrived from somewhere else? A more speculative theory suggests a link between Basque and the languages of the Caucasus, particularly Georgian or Chutian. These languages share a few typological similarities, such as errative grammar structures and an emphasis on consonants, but the evidence is thin and no genetic or archaeological trails support such a migration. Others have pointed further afield, noting a few faint resemblances between Basque and languages once spoken in ancient Mesopotamia or North Africa. Again, the similarities seem more poetic than proven. What if Euskara didn't arrive? What if it never left? What if long before Indo-European languages swept across the continent, long before Greek met Latin and Celtic spread through the rivers and hills, there was a network of languages that dotted the landscape? Languages like Euskara, distinct and localized, evolving quietly in valleys and coastlines. And what if Euskara is the last survivor of that lost network? If so, the Basque people have guarded more than just a language. They've preserved a window into a forgotten era, a time before borders, before history was written, when language was the shape of a world not yet named. Still, mysteries remain. Even within the Basque country itself, dialects vary dramatically. Villages just a few miles apart sometimes speak forms of Euskara, so different they're barely mutually intelligible. This linguistic fragmentation suggests great age, more time for variations to grow independently, but also complicates the effort to reconstruct any original form. And then there is the question of writing. Euskara, for most of its history, was an oral language. Written records only begin to appear in the Middle Ages, long after the language had likely existed for thousands of years. The earliest known text in Basque is the Glossa Silionenses, a set of marginal notes written in the 10th or 11th century mixed with Latin and Spanish. The sunken city of Veneta, a Baltic Atlantis along the windswept shores of the Baltic Sea, where the sand shifts with the tides and the air carries the scent of salt and pine. Fishermen still tell stories when the fog rolls in. Stories of church bells that ring beneath the waves, of towers glimpsed through sea mist, of a city that was once the richest in the north until the sea swallowed it whole. They call it Veneta. According to medieval chronicles, Veneta was a great port city, vast, multicultural, and opulently wealthy. Situated somewhere along the southern Baltic coast, perhaps near modern-day Germany or Poland, it was said to be a hub of commerce and diplomacy. Merchants from Byzantium, Scandinavia, the Islamic world, and beyond allegedly passed through its gates. Its markets glittered with gold. Its temples honored many gods. And its people lived in luxury unknown to their neighbors. But no trace of a city remains above ground today. No walls, no streets, no ruins, just a legend and a mystery. The earliest written references to Veneta appear in the 11th and 12th centuries in the works of chroniclers, such as Adam of Bremen and Helmold of Bosa. They describe it as a marvel of the world, a city of incomparable grandeur, inhabited by Slavs, and known for its pagan rituals and open trade. But they also hint at a fall, sudden, dramatic, and final. One version of the legend tells of moral decay, that the people of Veneta, rich and arrogant, turned away from virtue. They mocked religion. They rejected humility. And in punishment, the sea rose and took the city. A second version speaks of betrayal, that a Christian missionary rejected and humiliated, cursed the city before departing, and that his words took root in the waves. And yet another tells of simple hubris, that the people dug too greedily, built too high, or neglected the gods who had once protected them. But where was Veneta really? Historians and archaeologists have long searched for clues. One candidate is the town of Woolin on an island of the same name off the Polish coast. Excavations there have revealed an important medieval settlement, Multithnik, bustling with trade and protected by ramparts. Some believe Woolin may have been the real Veneta, or at least its inspiration. Viking artifacts, Islamic coins, and Byzantine ornaments have all been found there, suggesting far-reaching trade connections. But Woolin was never submerged. It still stands today, smaller and quieter, yes, but intact. The sea did not take it. Other possible locations include the island of Usedom, the shallow lagoons of the Oder estuary, and even submerged sandbanks off the coast of Castrome, where some claim to have seen underwater ruins, walls, stone paths, or the foundations of towers depending on the tide and the eye of the beholder. Modern sonar mapping has revealed anomalies in these areas. Rectangular formations, linear patterns, displaced stones in shapes not easily explained by nature, but none have yielded definitive proof. Could these be remnants of Veneta, or are they natural formations shaped by centuries of shifting sediment or ice? Skeptics argue that Veneta is more myth than memory. A medieval Atlantis born from regional pride, religious cautionary tales, and the enduring power of a city imagined rather than remembered. But others point out how persistent the story is across centuries and cultures. The legend has remained carried in chronicles, songs, and even nautical charts. In some, Veneta is drawn faintly on maps long after it should have vanished, often paired with the phrase Civitas Submersa, sunken city. The Kennedy manuscript, a cursed book from Scotland. The Scottish Highlands are a land of slate-gray skies, ancient forests, and mist-covered lochs. Amid the rolling heather and wind-worn hills lie the remnants of forgotten abbeys, half-buried stone, crumbling towers, and graves long overgrown with moss. It was in one such ruin, according to local tradition, that a strange book was found, its vellum pages stiff with age, its ink faded to the color of dried blood. They called it the Kennedy manuscript, bound in dark leather and sealed with rusted clasps. The manuscript bore no title on its cover. It was unearthed, according to early 19th century accounts, during restoration work at the ruins of Crossregal Abbey, once a stronghold of the powerful Kennedy clan in medieval Scotland. Found tucked behind a loose stone in the wall of a side chapel. The book was wrapped in linen and tucked beside a carved bone cross. Its contents remain a mystery, at least in part. Portions of the manuscript, now held in fragments of the National Library of Scotland, are written in Latin and Middle Scots and appear to contain a mix of religious texts, genealogical records, and cryptic poetry. But not all of it can be translated. A portion of the book is written in a cipher, a complex substitution code that has resisted full decryption even in the modern age. What has been translated, however, is enough to raise eyebrows. There are references to a binding made in ink and flesh, to the tongue that breaks bloodlines, and to a curse spoken not in anger, but in cold law. One section appears to recount a dream or vision of a tower struck by lightning, a red star falling into a glen, and a child born under silence, who shall unmake a house of stones. But beyond the language, it is the manuscript's alleged effect on those who possessed it that birthed its darker legend. After its discovery, the manuscript was taken into private custody by a descendant of the Kennedy family. Within 2 years, the man, Lord Fergus Kennedy, was dead, drowned under suspicious circumstances during a storm on the Ayr coast. His son inherited the manuscript and, according to family letters, became obsessed with decoding the ciphered sections. He was later declared mentally unfit and confined to an institution where he reportedly tore pages from the book and claimed they were listening to him. Other deaths followed. A fire consumed the estate in 1861. Another heir vanished during a hunting trip in the Highlands. A later descendant who attempted to donate the manuscript to a London museum in the 1930s died suddenly of unexplained heart failure just days after delivery. The museum returned the book. Was it all coincidence? Skeptics argue that the so-called curse is nothing more than an invention of Gothic imagination, a blend of family tragedy and historical accident exaggerated by generations eager to attach meaning to loss. The Highlands, after all, are rich with folklore. Tales of cursed relics, second sight, and fateful omens are part of the cultural fabric. But others believe the manuscript contains something more than superstition. Some researchers have proposed that the Kennedy manuscript may have been a legal or magical document, an oath or contract created by a 15th century abbot with ties to both Catholicism and older pre-Christian traditions. A form of binding curse designed not as punishment, but as protection meant to defend a bloodline from betrayal or delusion. The dancing. Statues of Wells Cathedral. Stone figures in motion. At the edge of the Menop Hills in Somerset, England, stands one of the most captivating cathedrals of the medieval world. Wells Cathedral. Its honeycombed stone glows in morning light, its Gothic arches rising like a frozen wave. To step inside is to enter a space suspended in time. Ribbed vaults stretch overhead and sunlight spills through stained glass in pools of quiet color. But among the sacred geometry and hushed reverence, there is something unexpected. Above the Jesse window, high on the west front of the cathedral and scattered along its interior niches, stand figures not locked in solemnity, but in motion. Dozens of carved statues dating back to the 13th and 14th centuries appear to twist, leap, and gesture, not as saints or martyrs frozen in veneration, but as if mid-dance, arms raised, garments flowing, expressions caught in animated display. For centuries, locals and visitors alike have referred to them as the dancing statues. At first, they seemed no more than an artistic flourish, a unique aesthetic choice by the cathedral's master masons. Wells Cathedral was, after all, known for its innovative sculpture. The facade alone features over 300 figures, an immense gallery of carved saints, kings, and angels unlike any other in England. But these particular statues are different. They seem alive, too alive. One figure appears to balance on the edge of a pedestal, foot lifted as though caught mid-leap. Another leans into a partner whose features are strangely eroded as if worn by more than time. Several appear to look not outward at the congregation, but inward at each other. And then there are the accounts scattered across centuries or stories, mostly quiet, mostly secondhand, of the statues moving, not in broad theatrical ways, but subtly, a tilt of the head, a raised arm where before it had hung. Choir boys in the 17th century reportedly claimed they would return in the morning to find a hand turned, a foot shifted. A visitor in the 19th century described a strange creaking sound during evenong, followed by the unmistakable sense that the figures above the choir had changed position. None of these claims were ever verified. The statues remained where they were, and yet the rumors persisted. What explanation could there be? Architecturally, the cathedral does hold mechanical marvels. The Wells Cathedral clock, for instance, is one of the oldest working clocks in the world, dating to the late 14th century. Above it, nightly figures ride in circles, mechanically striking bells on the quarter hour, a medieval automaton that still functions today. Could the dancing statues have once been part of a larger mechanism? Some scholars have speculated that the cathedral's designers, inspired by the movement of the clock, may have attempted a second, more ambitious project, a kinetic sculpture moved by hidden gears or pulleys. If so, no mechanism survives and no records confirm its existence. But the design of the figures themselves raises deeper questions. Why were these particular statues made with such vivid movement when others, saints, bishops, even archangels, remain still and dignified? Why are the dancing figures placed where they are, close enough to the public to be noticed, but just high enough to be out of reach? And why do some appear in places with no clear liturgical or narrative function? Some theorists suggest an older inspiration. Long before the cathedral was built, the area around Wells was known for its sacred springs. The very name of the town derived from the ancient wells that once bubbled through the limestone, believed by pagan inhabitants to hold healing properties. Could the dancing statues be a remnant of earlier spiritual traditions, subtly woven into Christian stonework? Were they meant to honor a seasonal rite, a procession at the equinox, a forgotten festival absorbed, but not erased by the church? King John's lost treasure, a royal fortune swallowed by the wash. The flat, windswept landscape of the Wash is unlike any other in England. It stretches for miles. Mud flats, salt marshes, tidal creeks, and brackish channels. Beneath its calm surface lies centuries of history. Ships lost, villages swallowed, and somewhere perhaps a royal treasure buried deep in the silt. On the morning of October 12th, 1216, King John of England was fleeing. The country was in chaos. His barons had rebelled against him, angry over heavy taxation and broken promises. Just the year before, he had been forced to seal the Magna Carta at Runny, an event that would echo through history, though John had no intention of honoring its terms. War followed. France had invaded. Castles fell. Roads were no longer safe. John was sick, likely suffering from dysentery, and desperate to reach the safety of Newer Castle. To avoid enemy forces in difficult terrain, he made the fateful decision to split his party. He would ride ahead with his guards and advisors, while his baggage train, laden with wagons, horses, carts, and significant portion of the English crown jewels, would take a longer route across the Wash during low tide. They would never arrive. According to chroniclers of the time, the tide came in faster than expected, swallowing the causeway beneath them. The heavy wagons became mired in the mud. The treasure was lost to the sea. John died days later at Newark, leaving behind a legacy marked by failure, betrayal, and collapse. But what exactly was lost? That question has haunted historians, treasure hunters, and archaeologists for generations. The crown jewels in 1216 were not as we know them today. The modern regalia, St. Edward's crown, the imperial state crown, were created centuries later. John's treasure likely included a mix of coronation regalia, holy relics, state documents, and personal wealth. Golden goblets, silver plate, jeweled reliquaries, ceremonial swords, and coins. Perhaps even ancient artifacts passed down from previous monarchs. Contemporary sources differ in detail. Some mention specific items like the Sword of Tristan, a legendary blade believed to have mystical powers. Others refer to relics of the saints or gems from the East, implying that John's trove may have included crusader spoils or gifts from the papacy. But no complete inventory survives, and so the imagination fills the gaps. Was it merely royal baggage, valuable? Yes, but not irreplaceable. Or is it something more? Some theorists believe the treasure may have included lost documents, early versions of royal charters, or treaties whose survival would have altered the trajectory of English governance. Others suggest something darker, that the treasure contains sacred or even heretical texts, hidden from the church or relics tied to Templar rites, gifts from allies John had cultivated in secret as his grip on power weakened. Whatever it was, it disappeared. Searches began as early as the 13th century, but the wash is treacherous ground. Tides shift dramatically. Channels move. The landscape is constantly remade by the sea, and no confirmed trace of the treasure has ever been found. Modern attempts using ground-penetrating radar, sonar scans, and drone imaging have identified a few anomalies. Buried timbers, concentrations of metal, but none have yielded a definitive discovery. Is it still there, buried beneath centuries of silt? Or was it recovered in secret? Some local legends tell of villagers who found chests washed up days after the disaster, only to vanish themselves shortly afterward. Others speak of monks from nearby abbeys who quietly retrieved sacred items and never reported them. In the 17th century, a farmer claimed to have found a jewel-encrusted crucifix near the old causeway, but the item was never seen again. And then there is the question of whether the treasure was truly lost at all. A minority of scholars have raised the possibility that the story was invented or at least exaggerated to cover a more complicated reality. The casket letter's forgery or betrayal of a queen. In a chamber lit by candlelight, a queen sits alone. Ink stains her fingers. The scratching of the quill is the only sound. Outside the walls of Loch Leven Castle press in, cold and damp, surrounded by the still waters of a Scottish loch. She writes, or does she? This is the image invoked by the legend of the casket letters, a collection of 8 missives and several poems supposedly written by Mary, Queen of Scots, during the most perilous time of her life. Letters that would later be used to imprison her, force her abdication, and destroy her reputation. Letters that may never have been hers at all. The mystery begins in the summer of 1567. Mary had been queen since she was 6 days old, but her rule was increasingly unstable. Scotland was a land divided by religion and loyalty, and Mary's Catholicism made her a target in an increasingly Protestant kingdom. Her personal life was also in turmoil, particularly her marriage to Henry Stuart. Lord Darnley, a man of ambition, jealousy, and poor judgment. On the night of February 10th, 1567, Darnley's residence at Kirkhoe Field was destroyed in a mysterious explosion. His body was later found nearby, not burned or crushed by debris, but strangled. Suspicion fell on many, but one name rose quickly to the surface. James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a powerful nobleman and Mary's rumored lover. Just weeks later, Bothwell abducted Mary on a remote road and, depending on the version told, either seduced or forced her into marriage. Their union shocked the kingdom. Noblemen rebelled. Mary was captured and imprisoned. Both fled into exile. It was in this charged atmosphere that a small silver casket, described as about a foot long, studded with ivory, was presented to the Scottish Privy Council. Inside were letters of love, poems, notes written in French, Mary's native language. Some were unsigned, others bore no date, but all, according to those who possessed them, implicated Mary in the murder of her husband and her passionate attachment to Bothwell. The contents were never made fully public. Only summaries or translated copies were shared. Some read aloud, some transcribed, others paraphrased. The originals, if they existed, disappeared over time, but the damage was done. Mary, already under arrest, was forced to abdicate the throne in favor of her infant son, James. She would spend the next 19 years imprisoned in England under the weary eye of her cousin, Elizabeth, before being executed for alleged treason in 1587. But here is the question that has haunted historians ever since. Did Mary write the casket letters? Some believe she did. They point to the emotional language, the poetic metaphors, the desperate longing expressed in certain lines. The letters refer to secret meetings, to shared guilt, to a bond so powerful that it would justify any act, even murder. They fit in tone and timing with what many suspected about Mary's relationship with both. But there are problems, significant ones. First, the chain of custody. The letters were said to have been discovered by one of Mary's enemies, James Douglas, Earl of Morton, in a chest allegedly belonging to Bothwell. No witnesses saw the moment of discovery. The documents passed from hand to hand among those who stood to benefit from Mary's downfall. Second, the originals were never submitted for independent examination. The versions shown to Elizabeth's court were partial translations. No full French manuscript survives. Some scholars suggest the letters may have been forged outright, written by Morton and his allies to justify Mary's deposition. Others believe real letters may have been altered, lines added, meanings twisted, poems spliced into frame Mary damningly. There is also the matter of handwriting. Mary was known to write in a highly distinctive script, yet no surviving copy of the casket letters matches it exactly. Forensic analysis is impossible without the originals. But even contemporary figures doubted their authenticity. Some, including Elizabeth herself, found the matter suspiciously convenient. And then there is motive. Those who sought to remove Mary needed more than rebellion. They needed justification. A queen could not simply be overthrown. She had to be seen as morally unfit. The letters provided that moral failing in written form. Adultery, conspiracy, betrayal of a husband and a kingdom. The man who beheaded a king, the executioner of Charles them. The morning of January 30th, 1649, was cold. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the streets of London in a thin crust of frost. The river Thames ran gray and silent past Whitehall Palace, where scaffolding had been erected outside the banqueting house. A crowd gathered thick with tension. Some wept, others watched in stunned silence. And from within the palace, King Charles's Furners emerged, cloaked in black, calm, composed. He was led to the platform and granted a moment of final prayer. In his last words, he declared himself the martyr of the people, forgiving those who had condemned him. Then he removed his cloak, knelt before the block, and stretched his neck forward. The blade rose and fell. The king was dead, but the man who held the axe, his name, his face remains unknown. Witnesses reported that the executioner was dressed in plain clothing, wearing a mask and a false wig to disguise his identity. A second similarly dressed man stood. Beside him, perhaps an assistant or second executioner, as was sometimes custom in royal beheadings. Their identities were never revealed to the public. No official record names them. No signed confession, no acknowledgement, only silence. And that silence, more than the act itself, is what birthed the mystery. Because this was not just a noble, not even just a royal. Charles was a king, an anointed sovereign, believed by some to rule by divine right. To execute a king was an act of unprecedented gravity. Whoever struck that blow risked not just retribution from royalists, but damnation in the eyes of many. So who was he? One name rises above the rest. Richard Brandon, the common hangman of London, son of Gregory Brandon, who held the same post before him. Richard had carried out several high-profile executions for the Commonwealth, including those of noblemen and traders. He was experienced, paid for his work, familiar with the blade. Just days after Charles's execution, rumors spread that Brandon had done the deed. Some said he was paid $30, a considerable sum at the time. Others claimed he refused the task, fearing the consequences. An anonymous pamphlet, The Confession of Richard Brandon, emerged shortly after his death, claiming he had confessed on his deathbed to beheading the king. But the document's authenticity is widely disputed. No official seal, no corroborating witness, and Brandon himself died only 6 months after the execution, allegedly plagued by guilt, though no cause of death was officially declared. Was it him? If not, who else would have had the skill and the nerve? Another possibility is William Hewitt, a soldier in the Parliamentary Army. Years later, following the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II, Hewitt was arrested and tried for involvement in the regicide. He confessed under duress to having been present on the scaffold, but denied being the executioner himself. No evidence was found to prove otherwise, and he was ultimately spared execution. Some believe the man behind the mask may have been a foreign mercenary, someone brought in to carry out the task without the burden of local loyalty or fear of retaliation. A few witnesses noted an unfamiliar accent in the short words the executioner spoke on the scaffold. Others thought the man moved stiffly, clumsily, as if unaccustomed to the weight of the axe. Could it have been a loyalist, ironically, performing the act to spare another? There are theories that a man loyal to the king offered to carry out the execution himself, ensuring a clean, respectful death rather than a drawn-out display of incompetence by a hesitant or hostile headsman. If true, this might explain the relative speed and precision of the strike. The axe fell once cleanly. Witnesses noted that Charles's death was quick and dignified, unusual for such a high-pressure public execution. But this theory raises other questions. Why the disguise? Why the secrecy? Why no note left behind? It is also possible that multiple individuals were involved and that the true executioner never stood on the scaffold at all, that the assistant swung the axe, that the deed was carried out not by a known hangman, but by someone whose name we never recorded, whose face we never saw. The missing panel of the Bayeux Tapestry, a story left unfinished. Laid out in soft light within a dim gallery in Normandy, the Bayeux Tapestry runs nearly 70 m long. Its linen frame stretching like a medieval scroll embroidered with images of kings, comets, ships, and war. At first glance, it seems complete. It tells a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Or does it? A closer look reveals that the final panel of the tapestry is gone, torn, lost, or never completed. What remains is an abrupt halt. The last surviving scene shows a group of soldiers pursuing fleeing enemies. Some on horseback, others wounded or turning in panic. There are no closing words, no declaration of victory, no depiction of William the Conqueror, crowned king. The final curtain of one of Europe's most significant conquests is absent. Why? The Bayeux Tapestry is widely believed to have been created in the 1070s within a decade of the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Commissioned most likely by Bishop Odo, the half-brother of William the Conqueror, the tapestry was stitched by skilled artisans, possibly in England. Despite being called a tapestry, it is in fact an embroidered narrative crafted with wool-on linen in earthy reds, browns, greens, and blues. It depicts the lead-up to the Norman invasion of England, beginning with Edward the Confessor's promise of the crown, Harold Godwinson's fateful oath, and culminating in his death at Hastings. But then it stops just short of William's coronation. Was it ever finished? Was the final panel lost to time, or was it deliberately removed? Historians and textile experts note that the current tapestry ends with a vertical seam, an abrupt, unfinished edge. The border decorations, which run uninterrupted along the top and bottom of the tapestry's length, are also cut mid-motif. This suggests that the original work continued and was likely longer than what survives. Some estimate that as much as 2 or 3 meters may be missing. What might have filled those final scenes? The most obvious answer is William's coronation on Christmas Day, 1066, an event of enormous historical significance and one that logically concludes the tapestry's arc. That moment would have symbolically cemented Norman rule over England. But why would such a moment be absent? One theory is that the panel existed but was lost or destroyed. The tapestry was housed for centuries in Bayeux Cathedral and was subject to movement wherein periods of neglect. It was even used as a covering for carts during the French Revolution. It is not unthinkable that the final section was simply damaged beyond repair or cut away during a period when its historical value was not fully appreciated. Another theory suggests a more deliberate omission. Could it be that the final panel depicted something too controversial? Some speculate that the last scene may have shown not just William's coronation, but the resistance and unrest that followed. William's rule in England was far from peaceful. The harrying of the North, a brutal campaign of suppression, left thousands dead and entire regions burned. Might the missing panel have illustrated this darker chapter, one that Odo or later caretakers prefer to forget? Others point to the idea of political propaganda. The tapestry, after all, is not a neutral document. It frames the Norman invasion with subtle legitimacy, suggesting Harold broke his oath and implying divine approval for William's conquest. A missing final panel might have undercut that narrative, perhaps showing Harold's body being honored by the English, or William met with resistance instead of triumph. The Cross of the Angels, a divine gift in Edo. In the quiet city of Edo, nestled in the green folds of Atorias, the Cathedral of San Salvador rises like a stone sentinel. Within its relic chamber, under soft lights and the gaze of centuries, rests a cross unlike any other, a glowing artifact of delicate filigree, gold, and gemstones. Known as the Cruz de Los Angeles, or the Cross of the Angels, it gleams from behind protective glass, its radiant form. Shaped like a Greek cross, equal-armed, symmetrical. At its center, a medallion of gold. Around it, delicate lattice works studded with sapphires, garnets, pearls, and emeralds, each one glinting with a soft, eerie luster. It is undeniably beautiful, and its origin is a story wrapped in wonder. The cross is believed to have been made around the year 808 in the early days of the Kingdom of Asturias, one of the few Christian strongholds left in Iberia after much of the peninsula had fallen to Muslim rule. It was commissioned by King Alfonso II, a devout monarch who ruled from Edo and sought to make the city a spiritual capital for Christians in exile. But legend tells a different tale. According to the earliest local tradition, the cross was not made by human hands at all, but delivered by angels. As the story goes, two pilgrims arrived at the gates of Edo seeking shelter. They were taken in and offered a place to stay, while the city slept, but in the morning, the strangers had vanished. In their place was a golden cross resting on the ground where they had knelt to pray. Word spread quickly. The cross was declared a divine gift, a sign of favor from heaven, a relic meant to protect the Christian kingdom. The name followed, the Cross of the Angels. So what is it? An act of devotion by goldsmiths in the service of a king, or something stranger? From a historical perspective, there is strong evidence that the cross was indeed made during Alfonso II's reign. A Latin inscription on the back names him and dates the gift. It reads Hoc Opus Perfectum Estab. It also names the recipient, the Church of San Salvador in Edo. But the cross's design has raised questions for centuries. The craftsmanship is exceptional, even by modern standards. The gemstones are mounted with great precision. The balance and proportions are near perfect. The style draws not just from Visigothic tradition, but hints at Eastern influences, Byzantine motifs. Some say elements that shouldn't easily be found in a remote mountain kingdom in the early 9th century. Where did this knowledge come from? Aureus was not a wealthy empire nor a major trade hub. Its court was modest, its resources limited. How then did its artisans possess the tools and the vision to create something so refined? Some scholars suggest the influence may have come from refugee craftsmen, goldsmiths fleeing the Muslim conquest of the South, bringing their techniques and styles northward. Others believe the cross may have been partially assembled from older fragments, recycled gold, reused gems, perhaps even pieces from earlier, now lost relics. But none of this explains the legend. Why did the story of angelic visitation emerge so quickly? Why was it accepted so readily, not just by the public, but by religious authorities? Was it simply propaganda? A tale crafted to sanctify the monarchy, to draw pilgrims, to assert divine legitimacy, Or did something truly strange occur in the cathedral's early days? More curiously, the cross seems to have endured through centuries of peril. It survived Viking raids on the northern coast. It survived wars, fires, political collapse. Even in modern times, the cross faced danger. In 1977, it was stolen during a break-in at the cathedral. When it was recovered weeks later, the gold work had been damaged, bent, and torn, but none of the gemstones were missing. Experts feared it would never be the same. But when the cross was restored and returned to the cathedral, witnesses remarked on its glow. Some even claimed it seemed brighter than before.